Hey, Chicago, what do you say? It is the CHGO Cubs Podcast. It's a nice, sunny Monday morning. The playoffs march on a little bit deeper for the rest of the teams that are in it, and the offseason marches on for your Chicago Cubs a little bit deeper. And what's that mean? Oh, you've been waiting for it. You've been waiting for this day. The CHGO report cards start today. And we brought in a special guest to help us pass out our first grade, Meghan Montemurro from the Chicago Tribune. Welcome, and thank you for coming in. We appreciate that.
Thanks for having me.
Meghan and I, we were talking before the show. We go back to Mike Quaddy's first season.
No.
And then you left town, then you came back to town. Now you're back with the Tribune. You were in Philadelphia in between. So when you look at what the Phillies have done and what the Cubs have done, where do you see the biggest difference? And, well, money's the biggest difference.
Yeah. And what's spending it, yeah.
What's been the most successful thing the Phillies have done that the Cubs have not?
I mean, signing a superstar. I mean, I think you look at what Bryce Harper has done since signing with the Phillies. I mean, it just completely changes the dynamic of that team when you have that sort of charisma, personality, and then obviously the hitter that they have in the lineup. A guy who, you know, was really good in terms of buying into the vision. I mean, he went from playing right field to first base, you know, put in the work to be really good at first base. And once you have somebody like that on board, you know, I think it's just easier to sell your vision when you are trying to, you know, bring players in from the outside.
Yeah, well, and like you've seen the last, 5 years, the Cubs and the Phillies obviously go in very different directions. And like we're seeing it with the Phillies the last few years now. Well, it was World Series 2 years ago, NLCS last year, and then another playoff appearance, won the division, depending where they go from here. But the Cubs aren't doing that, and a lot of it has to do with their star players, what the Phillies have done as far as adding to the Major League roster. I think that's like the biggest difference that you see between them and the Cubs the last 4 years.
I just know that so far this weekend, I don't even know if it was technically the weekend. Quintana pitched pretty well, by the way. So we can now end that. The Cubs won the trade. And Cease with 3 innings, 3 runs. That was it's interesting that both are split. I just know that when Kyle Schwarber hit the home run, once again, my whole life went through the whole cycle again of how did he get away for nothing. And I still say that's one of the biggest mistakes that the Cubs have made of players that they already had in-house was letting him get away for nothing. But I still would agree that even if Schwarber were still here, you would still want a superstar. I don't know. In my head as like a child, I say Schwarber was a superstar when he walked up the stairs in Cleveland. There's no question that was a superstar type like aura around the guy. But I wouldn't put him on the level of Bryce Harper, Shohei Ohtani, Juan Soto, yada, 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 opportunities they've had. Cody, are you rooting for anybody in these series? I know you hate watched the Brewers. I saw you tweaking them on Twitter.
Oh, it was fun. Yeah, I mean, at this point now I'm probably rooting for Cleveland for the entire series or the entire playoffs. Kind of digging the Royals as well. As far as National League, man, I'm not. I mean, I hope they all lose. Like, I don't know. Like,
I don't think that's possible. Though.
I don't really.
One of them has to win,
like,
I think.
I thought it was hilarious that Dodger fans continued to look like clowns yesterday. Phillies, it's like a love-hate thing for me. Like, I love Schwarber and I love Harper as players, and they should have been Cubs in my opinion, or Schwarber should still be a Cub and Harper should have always been a Cub. Castellanos has a place in my heart. Yeah, I mean, I also don't want Schwarber to be known as World Series champion with the Philadelphia Phillies either. So, yeah, I mean, I don't really have a rooting interest in the National League. I'm kind of rooting for an American League team to win this thing at this point.
The live YouTube chat is up and running. Thanks to everybody that's already joined in. Early on a Monday, $1.99 from James. The Cubs need to make the NLDS next year. James, that's what I was thinking a year ago at this time might be the case. So that's our first report card today will be Jed Hoyer, and we'll start to factor that into the conversation. Meghan, I do believe I've been thinking this since the beginning of realizing the Cubs were not going to make the playoffs.
In June. June is
the
when
best
you said
thing
it.
to me that could happen for the franchise and for the fans would be the opposite of what happened with the Diamondbacks last year. You don't want to see teams that are using smaller payrolls and still finding a way to have this massive success. I think it's a good thing that in the National League, the 4 teams left have all signed big money contracts to some players. Each team has somebody that's making a lot of money, and the Cubs still don't have their, don't get me wrong, Dansby Swanson's still making a lot of money, but it's not $200 million. It's not $300 million. It's not a $400 million contract. And so if there's any dream for anybody out there, even though it might be, a tiny chance for Juan Soto or whoever, it's good to see that the big money franchises are having success this year.
Well, and I would say too, like for the teams that haven't necessarily signed those contracts, you look at the Tigers, Guardians. I mean, they've developed superstars. That the Royals have Bobby Witt Jr. The Guardians have Jose Ramirez. Tigers have Tariq Skubal. I mean, they have like talent, and I think that's one thing when you look at the Cubs system. Like, do they have somebody that's going to be that 5+ WAR player that Jed Hoyer talked about that they need to either develop or have guys take that next step? And I think that's the question that they have to answer. And maybe it's a guy like Crow-Armstrong who, what he showed making the offensive adjustments and obviously combining that with his defense and base running, like maybe he becomes that guy for them. But if you're not going to be able to find it within your system, you have to go pay for it.
Yeah, and it's funny that you bring up the Diamondbacks thing, because I remember at spring training, Tom Ricketts bringing that up, and it's like the Diamondbacks did a really good job, 184, and it's like, yeah, but the Diamondbacks aren't the Cubs, right? As far as like what they have and the resources they have, like you've mentioned it, like the teams that made the playoffs that aren't big market teams have done a good job of building their own stars, right? Like Bobby Witt Jr.'s number one of that. When you look at the Royals and their ability. They paid him a lot of money, obviously, but Bobby Witt's through their system, and he's a superstar player. The Cubs aren't spending money to the level that like the Yankees and the Mets have, and Padres and Phillies and whatever, aren't spending the money to that level, and they're also not developing the stars that the small markets team, at least not yet. Right? Like maybe, like you said, maybe Crow-Armstrong gets there one day, but at this point, I don't think anyone would say he's a star player at this point. So they haven't developed one of those guys yet. They haven't paid for one like that yet. So they're kind of in like this middling place between those two kinds of philosophies that I guess my point is like they need to break out of that. They can't be one or the other. They probably shouldn't be the Diamondbacks route. They should be more of what like these big market teams that are willing to go out and spend for a star and take on the risk of a big money deal. I think the Cubs do need to try to take that route because they have the ability, the resources to do that. And that's the market that they're in. That's the kind of team they are or should be.
We've got Steven running the 1s and 2s before he heads to London, by the way, today. He's about to jump and go across the pond with the Bears guys. So how do we prepare him for a special event? We give him the Cubs show beforehand, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have the clip that Ryan put in there? Jed Hoyer was asked, I believe, by John Greenberg of The Athletic.
Steve Greenberg of the Sun Times.
Steve Greenberg.
Yes,
okay.
It was basically asking him.
Okay, he's working out. Let's do the percentage thing before we get to the soundbite, and then we'll do a break. What percentage should a president be evaluated on strictly end results, whether it's getting to the playoffs, winning the division, whatever you want to put it on. I would say at least getting to the playoffs for a team with the franchise with where they're at now. What percentage of your final grade when we get there will you want to base winning as part of that grade? What's fair for Jed Hoyer?
Well, I mean, I think when you go into a season with playoff expectations, not just like, hey, maybe we can make the playoffs. Like
not 2 years ago.
Yeah, not 2 years ago, right? 2 years ago, you're not grading Jed Hoyer on winning. When you go into a season with expectations to win, I think that a big chunk of that is of a final grade is, did they make the playoffs? Did they win enough games, right?
30%?
I think more. I think, is 50 too much? Is 50%
I was going to say like 70%.
Yeah, I was saying you're saying 30. I'm like, is 50 too much compared to like I was thinking at minimum 50.
Yeah. I feel Cody wants to say 100 maybe, but I
think you got to factor in at least 70% given how long, in this case, Jed Hoyer's been with the organization and has had his fingerprints on it, especially in the president role over the last 4 seasons. So I think that, plus combining with, a lot of the group coming back, I think winning has to play a pretty big role in the grade.
Yeah, there's only at least 50 was in my mind, and you said 25. I'm like, am I looking at it the wrong way?
Listen, no, I thought the conservative grade might come from the 2 beat writers in the middle of the room. But now, Cody, what percentage would you give then?
For how much, like,
how much of his grade should just be not getting to the playoffs?
Because for me, it's 90%.
There you go. Okay, maybe we are the conservative ones.
I'll take your 70% and I raise it to 90.
And you put the roster together. I mean, what am I supposed to say?
Yeah, and talked about playoffs, like preseason, all off season, during the season, like playoffs were the expectation, and you failed to meet your goals. He even said it at the press conference last week, like you set out with goals, you don't meet your goals, you fail to reach your goals. Like, that's a disappointment. He was clear on that as well. I think he feels the same way.
I haven't decided. I was going to only say 60, but now that Cody said 90, now I'm thinking 80. Weather, probably 20%. I don't know. Steven, can you play that clip?
That's a fair question. I think that we are in a really enviable and terrific position as an organization. I think that we've taken a really big picture view of building this organization. When we sold off the core in 21, we were in a position of having a farm system that was among the lowest ranked in baseball. We lost as much WAR off a team as any team in the last 30 years, and so we're building back from that place. I couldn't be more proud of the work that our staff has done and that I've done, putting us in position we are now. I think to be really healthy from a payroll standpoint, from a future commitment standpoint. We're incredibly healthy from a roster and a young player standpoint. So I think from a organizational positioning standpoint, I feel excellent about where we are. The last 2 years haven't ended in the postseason, and obviously I have to take accountability for that. Consecutive 83-win teams. We have to push beyond that, but in terms of positioning this organization for success next year and success in the future, I feel great about where we are as an organization, and I think the fans should feel good about it too.
So 83 is a number I can identify with. Most of my grades were never above an 83 in school, but 83 is not going to cut it when you're the Chicago Cubs back-to-back years. Niren wants us to grade further back, so that's going to be the next part of it after we take a break, is that we're going to our grades will be partially how much do you factor in winning and losing, and then short-term moves, long-term moves, overall grade. So that's how we're going to break down Jed. It's all coming up here in the next couple of minutes. First, our guy Cody's going to tell us about one of our great partners.
Game Time.
Love Game Time.
I love Game Time. You could have gone to the Bears game using Game Time yesterday. It's got a new feature called Game Time Picks, which makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I say this all the time. I live like a mile and a half north of Wrigley Field, so sometimes I just hop on the red line from Argyle and get down to Addison and then bring up Game Time to go to a game on the weekends whenever I'm not here talking about the Cubs and how they're ruining my life. But the cool thing is that you can bring it up right then and there and wait until the beginning, like an hour, 30 minutes before a game starts, and the price continues to go down the closer it gets to the game. That's the great thing about Game Time. So it's always, they basically incentivize waiting to buy your tickets. They have so many great things that come with it outside of those things. They have the game, like I said, Game Time picks. They have all-in pricing, which is a feature that shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. I know Luke hates that bait and switch stuff. I hate that bait and switch stuff.
Who doesn't?
Megan, I can tell you hate that bait and switch stuff. No one likes bait and switch. All right, they will tell you the price upfront. It won't change, and they have a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, which is always nice, especially at Wrigley with those polls. And then they have your lowest price guarantee, or they will credit you 110% of the difference. And they also have Game Time ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CHGO for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem with code CHGO for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it?
Game time.
Game time.
Some beers can say they're brewed for baseball, but only Blue Moon is brewed by baseball. Beer and baseball just go together, and no beer goes better than the one that was literally born in a ballpark. Blue Moon, created at Coors Field in Denver. It's the natural choice all season long. Nothing beats watching baseball or football like doing it with an ice-cold Blue Moon. We say summertime shy around here. This is my type of weather. I don't need the summer. I'm more of an autumn guy, and I don't need to pumpkin spice my beer. I just put a little orange slice on the corner of my Blue Moon. Blue Moon, brewed by baseball to give you a dose of nostalgia and get you excited for the season. A beer this good only comes around once in a Blue Moon, but you can enjoy it all year long. Bring the ballpark to you with Blue Moon Belgian-style wheat ale. It's one of a kind every time. Get Blue Moon delivered by visiting get.bluemoonbeer.com/CHGO to see your delivery options. That's get.bluemoonbeer.com/CHGO. Blue Moon, made brighter. Celebrate responsibly. Blue Moon Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. All right, so here we go. Jed Hoyer. We've established that anywhere between, what do we say, 70? Was that the low mark?
At least 70.
Somewhere between 70 and 90% of our grade will be based on the fact that Jed Hoyer, our individual grades, that Jed Hoyer did not get the Cubs into the postseason, and they ended up with 83 wins for the second straight season. But how's the rest of it factor out? What else do you put in there with it? So let's start with his short-term decisions. Hector Neris is one. I guess you factor that into also not necessarily going out and addressing an automatic closer, but saying, Adbert Alzolay, you're going to have a really good chance to do this, and we're also going to mix into that bullpen a veteran like Hector Neris.
Yeah. Who's someone you covered in Philly, right? For a little bit there, and he was good in Philly, right? He was good in Philly, good in Houston.
Were you surprised it went the way it did with the Cubs?
No, because I think at this stage of his career, where they had identified him to help them the most was like 7th, 8th inning guy. That was the ideal role for him. But when you lose Adbert, you lose Julian Merriweather, you can't use Mark Leiter all the time, especially as you're trying to figure out, okay, like, can he be effective enough against righties? So that put him in a position where this isn't the guy that you want in that spot. So I think that his role definitely impacted performance just at this stage of his career. And like, a credit to him, like, there were times that he figured out how to get it done. And like, even back to his time in Philly, like, he will never say no to not being available. Like that was the one guy where if everyone else, if their arm is barking or they're not feeling 100%, like, he's willing to go out there even if he's not at his best. And so that has a lot of value, but I just don't think he was used in the right spots, and that's not really a knock against him. I mean, it's just the circumstance of the team.
It's just kind of where things happen when you lose injuries or have ineffectiveness. Is like, well, this is the guy we're paying $9 million. Like, maybe he should be closing games. I don't know.
Right. Cody's been saying pretty much the same thing. It's basically like asking me to be the lead singer in a band, right? Like, not a great idea because I can't sing.
Yeah, I mean, I still think that signing Neris made a lot of sense, and I didn't hate the move, and I even after it all played out, I don't hate that they made the move. Like, he was always supposed to be a middle to late inning reliever. He was never supposed to be a closer for this team. And I think Jed even said in the presser, basically saying that they didn't have the depth at the time. And then in the middle of the season, they added Tyson Miller and Jorge Lopez, and those moves did turn out pretty well for them.
And Porter Hodge came up and was
and
good.
Porter Hodge emerged and shit like that.
So we're not going to put a ton of blame on him for the Neris thing, but for the way the bullpen was maybe constructed, our grades should also probably reflect that. Obviously, I think the biggest decision, position player-wise, that he made was saying, all right, we're going to give Christopher Morel run at third base. Mm-hmm. He's going to get – we're not saying it's all year, but he's going to be our third baseman to start the season. We think he's worked on it. We think he can play third base. And we think he can lay off the slider, the off-speed stuff out of the zone, right? They were so confident in Morel's plate approach that even when all of a sudden it wasn't going well, but they kept saying on the radio and in different interviews, man, he's so close. The results are going to come because we can see that he's changed his approach, and A plus B is going to equal C. The problem in my eyes is that when A kept happening a little bit more and he started struggling more and more, and he wasn't seeing the results that he wanted to see from being able to lay off that, he started to regress back to some old habits at the plate, and it never worked out. So the Cubs changed up on that. That part of it, the trade, is a long-term decision. What about the decision to give him the shot at third base?
I mean, I think that was obviously largely influenced by Craig Counsell wanting to see him there, because definitely the tone of what position they wanted him to focus on changed after
throughout the offseason, like three back and forth.
Right, as Counsell came in, and there clearly were more discussions behind the scenes. He obviously wanted to see him in spring and get eyes on him to see if what the team internally was viewing him as matched up. And I think it's the right thing to do. Like, this clearly was an important season for them to determine, can Christopher Morel be a significant part of this future? And the best pathway for that was third base. And so, they had to do that. And I agree. And I think also too, now that we have a full season of offensive numbers at Wrigley, the expected numbers were already showing from April until mid to late June that he was getting screwed over very frequently, especially at home. But you're right. He did then actually go into a slump and got away from what was making him successful. And I think just third base, I think his best position, and talking to scouts, some say outfield. I think second base is probably his best position, and that just clearly wasn't a pass. So short term, they had to see what he could do to feel comfortable with potentially moving on.
And I think even as late as Cubs convention, Carter Hawkins saying we still kind of looking at him as a move around piece, right? He wasn't, the third base thing wasn't really until spring training. Like she said, Craig Counsell did influence that as far as this is why we're doing it. I will say, maybe you change this to Jed not going and getting a third base option, a la Matt Chapman, who we've talked about. Had they gone and got a Matt Chapman, do you need to play Morel and at third base? Can you trade him at his peak value to fill out some other hole on the roster? That's maybe you can bring that as just a decision or a move Jed didn't make that resulted in going the route of trying to play Morel at third base.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you guys. I've been going back and forth with it in my own head. It just felt like they never really fully believed Morel could play third base, but then they didn't do anything to address it when it was a massive hole all season, or all last season too. In 2023 it was a mixture of Madrigal and who am I missing?
Played some
Wisdom.
Wisdom played
Thank
some
you. Wisdom and
David Bodie got some run. Who would have thought that was?
Well, I'm talking about in 2023.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Okay.
The hole going into the last offseason was clearly there. And, for sure, Matt Chapman was always an option that they could have gone down. But just they added Jeimer Candelario. I'm not saying that they should have brought him back either. I was fine that they didn't bring him back. But the fact that you basically didn't address it, and then in some ways, in my opinion, kind of forced Craig Counsell to be like, all right, we're gonna play Morel at third because it creates more roster flexibility. Because if you didn't, then you're probably more likely to play him at DH because all the other positions had better defensive players. Yeah. So
And it just limits what you can do roster
Right.
wise.
Yeah, and it limits, right? So, I think I guess you can, to be fair, you can put some blame on both Jed and Craig Counsell on this scenario. But yeah, I mean, it was a big decision because third base has been a hole since, Chris Bryant left? And I mean, even at the end of Chris Bryant's tenure, he wasn't playing third base anymore.
I also think one of the biggest things we've talked about decision-wise, we talked about many times last offseason, even after Bellinger was brought back, which is another sort of short-term decision, is the fact that I think most people looked at the roster as they headed to spring training and said, this team is at least a big bat short. At least a big bat short, even with Bellinger back, because you were just repeating, you were hoping he would repeat the really good season he had the year prior, and you would say, okay, they need a big bat. And I would think that Craig Counsell looked at the players that were in front of him and said, as anybody would, we don't have enough power. Morel at least provides us some power. We got to find a place for him every day, and if he's going to be one of our everyday players, I want to find a spot on the field, a position for him, so maybe we have to try it. But it's that whole of we don't have enough big bat pop that sort of creates that vacuum at third base. So we said many times, this team has questions. Questions are third base, first base, for sure, right? And even though they made that trade, the long-term trade, I personally am not going to say that I questioned the decision at catcher, but in hindsight, I should have looked at it and said, Jed's underestimating how old Yan Gomes might get this year. It wasn't crazy to think that. So while I'm not gonna knock him for the Neris decision, I'm not gonna knock him for trying Morel. The flip side of that is, should he have already decided Morel wasn't the guy and found somebody else and just moved on, or was it the right move to go through another evaluation piece and then have yet another question mark for a key position on the team going into the season? I'm starting to lean towards yes, even though that's revisionist history, because when he made the move, I would have said, it's the right move. Give Morel a lot of play at third base and see what you got.
No, I think we were all fine with it. I don't think we all thought it was like the best option, but they also didn't really have any other options in the system. But I think when they decided that was the play, it's like, okay, this is fine. Let's see if he can do this, because he is someone that had the most amount of innings in the minor leagues at any position that he played was at third base. And obviously, like as we see, and he is no longer on the team anymore, third base wasn't going to be the play, wasn't going to be the position he played long term, and they had to pivot to a different option that they hope can get them there. But yeah, I mean, it was a short term play, and the fact that it could have been a long term play had it worked out, but it ended up, I think, becoming a short term play, and then okay, we figured out this guy's not our third baseman. I think that's what that's in Jed's mind, is like, yeah, no, he can't play third base for us. We're gonna have to go somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, they basically traded off, trying to optimize for offense versus defense at that position. I mean, this is and to Morel's credit, I mean, I remember writing about this, and at the end of 2022, being in Toronto, watching him on the field pregame, working with Andy Green and Jonathan Moda, at third base, doing a ton of work, and then saw the same thing before every game this year at third base. I mean, that's one thing that they can't say. He put in the work.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
And it just obviously wasn't a fit. And I think that was the biggest question, and why Counsell got asked about pretty much every area in spring training is the trade-off you're willing to give, and the defense just was not close enough to make that work.
Yeah. And then the offense struggles. So
especially when the results weren't there.
Right. That's the short-term portion and short-term moves that Jed Hoyer did or did not make, the decisions that he did or did not make. In just a minute, we're going to talk about the long-term, which also includes the Morel trade. But first, I want to tell you about another one of our great partners. With Empire Today gives you a shop-at-home convenience, the right product for your needs, quick and professional installation at a low price guarantee. Empire Today is the best place to get new flooring, so of course, they've got some copycats, but Empire can't be beaten on quality, service, speed, and competitors sometimes advertise these low-quality products that Empire just won't even carry. Empire won't promise you the lowest prices, because anybody who does that is probably putting flooring in your home that they wouldn't put in their own house. Empire's philosophy is to help you find what you need, not overwhelm you with thousands of choices and substitutes. What they leave out of their selection is just as important as what they put in. They also have this killer virtual floor designer. Great way to see how your new floors are going to look in any space. It's easy. Just snap a picture on your phone and instantly see how new floors will look in your room. Shopping for floors at the old big box store? Good luck. It can be frustrating. You might be talking to the guy who was working in plumbing yesterday or the woman who was working in lumber the day before. And now all of a sudden, they're trying to sell you new floors. Yep. They pride themselves on a convenient shop-at-home service. They help customers shop for floors where they use floors so they can see exactly what their new floors will look like in their home's lighting. They also service their own warranties. Key, you don't have to track down the manufacturer. Just call up your friends at Empire. Schedule a free in-home estimate today. All listeners can receive, are you ready for this number? Pause, wait for it, $350 off. I know you don't think it's possible, but it's true. $350 off. That's the discount when you use the promo code CHGO. 4 important letters, CHGO, get you $350 off. Restrictions apply. See empiretoday.com/CHGO for details.
You know, I know it's starting to get cold out around here. It's October, but this actually might be the perfect time to start getting ready for next year's outdoor adventures. And you got to do that with Rugged Road. Rugged Road is dedicated to creating innovative and durable outdoor gear for adventurers who demand the best. Their products are designed with the highest quality materials and craftsmanship, ensuring they perform in the toughest conditions, whether you're on land or water. Rugged Road gear is built to accompany you on every adventure. Floatability, one of the most unique features of Rugged Road coolers is their ability to always float upright, so you'll never lose a drink. Rugged Road's got that lightweight design, so unlike other heavy-duty coolers, Rugged Road coolers are incredibly light, making them easy to transport on any trip without compromising on performance. They're durable and dependable, crafted to handle the toughest environments. Their coolers are built to last, ensuring they can keep up with any adventure. The coolers are guaranteed to keep their contents cool for up to 7 days, but often it's much longer than that. And they're versatile, perfect for a variety of outdoor activities, from fishing and tubing to camping and tailgating. Rugged Road coolers are designed to meet the needs of every outdoor or sports enthusiast. So gear up for your next adventure with Rugged Road coolers, reliable, durable, and built to last. Rugged Road is your ultimate outdoor companion. Head to ruggedroadoutdoors.com and use code CHGO for 10% off.
Beautiful. We are handing out our first CHGO off-season report cards for the year. It is Cubs President Jed Hoyer that is being evaluated on the show. Meghan Montemurro from the Tribune, nice enough to come in and help us evaluate the Cubs president. Near in the live YouTube chat says, Jed in the front office believed in Nick Madrigal when the whole fan base saw it a year plus earlier.
Yeah, Steven said we'll say he saw it like 3 years ago.
Steven Sox man. History. Anyways, that's my Hawk Harrelson. Did you catch that?
You got it.
So now we're doing the long-term aspects of Jed Hoyer, right? We talked about the short-term. Long-term was I'm not going to call it a bold move because I've said I'd like to see the Cubs make a bold move for a couple years. I don't know that trading Jackson Ferris is necessarily a bold move, but it borderlines on it. He's one of your top pitching prospects. You went and got a first baseman who had a pretty nice rookie season. Yeah. So how much credit do you give Jed Hoyer for making that move? Now, don't forget, Barb in the live YouTube chat, the godmother of the podcast, will say, Jackson Ferris, you've just fleeced the farm system.
Yeah,
he's going to be the best pitcher. And to her credit, I think Ferris was the Dodgers minor league pitcher of the year.
Yeah. He had a good year.
So factor that into your decision when you make the Michael Busch. What kind of credit do you give him for the Busch trade?
Well, you said it wasn't necessarily bold. I don't disagree with that. I think it's definitely surprising. No one saw that one coming. And so I think you give Jed some credit for being creative in a way to get a first baseman because, first base was such a revolving door since Anthony Rizzo was traded. Probably 5 or 6 guys played first base for them, like a lot of time at first base in the last 3 years. So to get Michael Busch in a trade, a guy who was really high in the Dodgers system, just was blocked at a bunch of different positions, to make a creative trade, bring him in, give him that runway to play first base. And then obviously Bush has to follow up with a good year, which he did. So I think you do give Jed credit for making a deal that no one saw coming and is a deal that can have a positive impact on this team for a few years to come now. I think that's a credit to Jed. And even though no one wants to give him any credit, like I think there is a credit in that and identifying a guy and making the move, trading a guy who could be a really good pitcher for you years down the road. And obviously the success that Bush did have this year helps that as well.
I mean, yeah, I think Jed and by extension, front office, scouts, I mean, they all deserve a lot of credit for that trade, not only identifying Bush as obviously somebody who was blocked in the Dodgers system, which, you know, obviously was pretty well known, but believing that he could play first base at a major league level. I mean, he had experience doing that in the Dodgers system, but he had primarily played second base, third base. And, you know, he's not the tallest first baseman out there, I think, as was seen on some plays. So, like, that definitely goes into scouting and getting eyes on somebody like that and doing the work behind the scenes to figure out, like, can this guy do it over a course of a full season since he has such a small sample size in the majors. So, yeah, I mean, I think it was really impressive seeing the work, too, that Bush put in spring training defensively to make him a viable defensive option there, because it could have been very easily another Morel situation where it's like, okay, this guy can hit, but we don't have a position for him. So, I think it definitely warrants credit to Jed and by extension the front office and the people around him for doing
Cody,
that.
how do you sorry, Megan. Cody, how do you evaluate it? I have Ghost in the live YouTube chat says even a broken clock is right twice a day.
Not wrong.
I mean, I obviously was a big fan of this trade. If you just go look back at the audio from the last year or the last 10 months, whatever. So I think Zaire Hope has turned out and very quickly emerged in their system as well. I think he ended up in Pipeline's top 100. So that's two guys who could turn out to be really good pieces for the Dodgers in like 4 or 5 years, I guess. But when you're the Chicago Cubs, I mean, I hope by then we're at a point where even if they do pan out, like the Cubs are in a winning situation and it doesn't matter. Like that, to me, that's what, when it comes to trading prospects and stuff like that, like it's, to me, you filled a hole that you absolutely had to fill. That's what they did. Michael Bush has been the best first baseman for the Cubs since Anthony Rizzo left, outside of Frank Schwindel's Linsanity run for 2 months. Okay. I like that they went and got a guy who was young and had a ton of years of control. I like that trade. And if we're sitting here in 5 years and Jackson Ferris and Zaire Hope are all making us think back in hindsight, then there are a countless list of other reasons or other problems that happened along the way to lead us to that point, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, you should your farm system should be good enough, your team should be good enough that you can afford to trade a prospect that has very high upside that you might regret, aka Dylan Cease, but you still might be able to get to the end. Like, that's why I say the Quintana thing. I joke that, like, that's a win, because you were in a window to win and you were trying to get that second ring out of it, and maybe it cost you Dylan Cease. It did, but you also had a guy that, you know, pitched in a playoff game.
And related to that trade, while yes, it sucked to see Dylan Cease go the other side of town and be a Cy Young runner-up and have success there, and now having success with the Padres, while that does suck, the biggest thing that hurts me the most is the fact that they couldn't develop any other pitching after that. Like, that's the thing. And that's what I'm saying now. Like, I think the organization, as much as I'm very upset with it right now, internally, scouting and
player
development, drafting wise, I know, Niran, you hate when I say this. I think that it's light years better than it was at that time period. So if you continue to have solid drafts like that, then you can find that next left-handed starter, whether it's, you know, he's a high school kid or a guy coming out of college, you know, like that's just the way that I'm always going to look at it, because the Cubs aren't a small market team and they can easily fill that hole any way they want.
Yeah. So the other long-term moves that we could kind of think of as we're brainstorming this before the show. Obviously, signing Shota. I don't think anybody can sit here and say that wasn't an A.
Yeah.
Right? If it's not an A, it's an A minus, right?
Well, and it was your lone all-star, and it wasn't like, every team gets an all-star, so it had to be someone. Like, he earned that all-star shot, whereas no one else on the team really did. Shota had a great year.
And the other things that are long-term plays are that you want to consider are, okay, Amaya got a shot. He did hire Craig Counsell and decide to fire his buddy David Ross and make Counsell the highest paid manager in baseball, and he wasn't going back to the Brewers anyway. The Morel trade for Paredes once he started to make a long-term deal. All of those. So, like, where do you start to think your long-term grade factors in? Because for me, I'm looking at all of those and I'm saying, well, wait a minute. Most of those long-term deals and moves and decisions, I'm pretty happy with. I'm pretty happy with the Bush trade. I'm very happy with the Imanaga trade. I don't know where I lie in the Morel trade, but I'm fine with the way that worked out for them. I think it was time to make a decision. Counsell, I think most people would say, while the results certainly were not what people expected. Some people were telling me in the live YouTube chat they were going to have 8 more wins because of him this season. That didn't happen. But I also don't think you can make this decision on the long term without saying, well, what didn't they do? Right? This is what they did do. What didn't Jed do long term? And that's, for me, again, the play for the superstar. Now, I don't think Shohei was ever coming here, but if Shohei Ohtani is a factor or out there available to every team, even if he had zeroed in on one and was going to help them do it, what do you have to do to make him change his mind? If it's not him, it's another star player, right? And Megan, I know you believe like ownership obviously plays a factor in this part of it too.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's probably one of the biggest factors. I mean, just having covered the Phillies when they were pursuing, Manny Machado and Bryce Harper in that offseason, I mean, that was coming from ownership of, we are getting one of these two guys, like, close the deal. And then that was at a point too where, the Phillies were trying to do what the Cubs did of building up the farm system and, making sure that they had really addressed the player development side. And they really probably weren't at the point where they should be trying to sign somebody like that. But when you have ownership saying, no, like, I'm going to pay the contract that it's going to take to sign one of these two guys. And then also, the owner is flying with his wife to Las Vegas to meet with Bryce Harper and his wife in person to hash out, the differences, to bridge that gap. I mean, yeah, that has a huge influence on what teams decide to do. I mean, look at what the Padres did with their, owner before he passed. I mean, like, ownership does influence these things. So as much as, you evaluate Jed Hoyer on these kind of things, if ownership's not going to be willing to sign that check, like, there's only so much a team president or general manager can do. And so that's the tricky part of, the Cubs being in the market that they are in and having the cash flow and revenue that they have. Yes, I mean, they should be having a star player, but that's not something that's going to be solely up to Jed Hoyer.
Yeah, and I think that's something that you always have to take into account. Like, people want to say, like, Jed's not Theo. And I don't think anyone would say that. I think Theo was someone who was willing to kind of fly by the seat of his pants in some situations, and you saw that with some of the spending he did. Jed's not like that. He's a lot more calculated, a lot more rationalized or whatever, reserved. But it's also like, even if he wanted to be like Theo, it kind of comes down to who the owner is. And I don't think he can ever be. And like, Theo obviously got some run to do that, but when things changed around COVID and when things had to change in the organization, and Jed took over, obviously, I think the organization as a whole became a lot more risk averse than when Theo was kind of running the show. So Jed could try, or he could try to be like, the GMs in Philly or San Diego or, Yankees, whatever. He's never really going to have the opportunity to spend at that level because the ownership is kind of putting the brakes on that just by the nature of the organization.
And I would just add too, like, I get, like, you have to keep replenishing your major league team through your player development, through the draft, international free agency and all that. And so if you aren't going to be able to dip into the top end of free agency, then yes, you better really be good at that player development level. And I think, obviously hiring Carter Hawkins from Cleveland, who comes from an organization where that is obviously very important to their success, I think is reflective on some of those decisions. So I don't think necessarily you take all blame away on that from Jed Hoyer in the front office, but I think it's worth keeping those two contrasting things in mind.
Yeah. Also, I gotta Gary in the chat keeps saying that Jed didn't want Shota. That
Gary believes Shota was involved in seeking out the Cubs more than the Cubs were seeking out.
Basically, what he's saying is that Shota's people, to not give Jed credit for that because Shota's people went to Jed. I mean, that may have played a part of it late in the negotiations, but Jed, we've talked to Jed. Jed was in Japan scouting Shota, being in conversations and talks with his representatives since they kind of figured out that he was going to get posted in the offseason. It wasn't like a Jed never thought about Shota until Shota came to him and said, I want to play for the Cubs. It's a lot more nuance and a lot more involvement on both sides than that. And maybe Shota's side helped push the deal over the finish line especially with the contract he eventually signed.
Well, and also everyone was waiting on Ohtani.
Nothing,
you had to make sure Ohtani was saying no to you before you're going
exactly. So
to your next levels of free agents.
I wouldn't put it as had Shota not reached out to Jed, he wouldn't be a Cub. Jed was very involved in scouting or going to Japan, talking to him, meeting him, scouting him, and then obviously in whatever negotiations they had and conversations throughout the offseason when he was posted. It also was a pretty short window of posting based on, considering Shohei had a lot of time to kind of make his decision. It wasn't a whole lot of time for Shota to be recruited and sign a deal and kind of until, like you said, until that situation resolved itself.
Cody, how much credit or pressure should you put on Jed Hoyer if you're talking about Ohtani or somebody else for not building a resume enough or a roster that's been slightly successful enough? Like what Megan's saying is the Phillies weren't in position where you would have said they need to go sign Bryce Harper. That's going to put them over the top. So that's forward thinking from the owner to say, this is what I want to do. It'll help us long term. But also, how much should Hoyer be evaluated for saying, listen, you had a top 10. Ricketts could say, I gave you a top 10 payroll, and you haven't been to the playoffs 2 years. Why should I put my faith in you that a $600 million player isn't going to be a massive debt on my side? Is there something to that as well?
Yeah.
Should some of that pressure also be on the president for not showing the owner, you can trust me with a $600 million deal if you're ever going to do it?
I mean, they went over the luxury tax after re-signing Bellinger. I mean, I guess so. In some ways, they had plenty of dead money on the books this year with Mancini's other $7 million. Tucker Barnhart made $1 million. I don't know what the money exactly was, but Jed talks about intelligent spending, risk-averse stuff, but even some short-term moves that they've made in recent years have exactly aged well for them. So, I mean, I guess in some ways, but I don't necessarily disagree with what you guys are saying about it. It's that it matters about what ownership cares about at the end of the day. And we've all sat here and said, or me and Luke at least have sat here and said that, we use Bryce Harper's contract as an example. In 5 years, those contracts will look like bargain moves because the market only continues to increase. Yeah.
Well, and I would say on a team perspective too, when the Phillies signed Bryce Harper, ownership, front office was the last couple years of this 13-year deal are going to be really bad. He's probably with his style of play and just his body might not hold up well when he's 38, 39, 40. But if we go to the World Series a couple times, win a World Series title or two,
no one will care.
Yeah.
No one's going to care. Flags fly forever.
And they will have made the money back anyway in merch and
that's
whatever.
Right. It's the price of being a billionaire owner. And it's the price of owning a baseball team in the major leagues right now. That's why when I say, hey, that you can look at the teams in the postseason whichever way you want to. you can look at the Diamondbacks and say they got there last year and the Cubs were only 1 game behind them and they have a lower payroll. But you can also look at the team that beat them and say, look at all the $200 million players on their roster. So it's like anything. You can make stats say whatever you want to create your theory on how things should be going. But I think at least some portion of it should go on to the Ricketts family. And as far as not making the big move, there is a creativity portion of it that I will evaluate Jed Hoyer, because there's still the way of you can trade some of these prospects and create the team, make the team better. Now, that's not going to affect your payroll in a positive way, but it will be a way to – there's 2 ways to get a superstar player. Why, 3, right? Trade for one, sign one, and develop one.
Yeah.
And so maybe PCA is that guy. But if it's not, then you better use one of the other 2 ways to go find that superstar player. Do we want to move on to any other topic you want to hit on the long term? Whether it's Counsell, Paredes, or should we go right to our grades and how you will evaluate him for?
I will
season?
say regarding the Morel Paredes trade.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that also includes Hunter Biggie as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think that it's one that we will look back on, and if things don't go well in the next 5 years, like, we'll look back on this and it will haunt us.
This one specifically?
This trade specifically. I do think it will
For
haunt
instance,
us.
if Morel does blossom
No, I
into
mean,
a
even
player,
what if Biggie ends up being a closer for the
Yeah,
Rays?
okay.
You know, like, I'm not a full believer in Paredes yet. I know it's only been 2 months, and there's plenty of audio of me saying that, like, we got to give the guy an opportunity. But he's had 2 months, and now next season is a big year for him into proving that he's the future third baseman for the Cubs. On top of the fact that, you know, you got some guys. You drafted Cam Smith in the first round of the draft this year. I don't know how he's going to pan out, but I'm just saying, like, that's a guy that they really like. If you take him in the first round, he's already a top 100 prospect in baseball. So, you know, is he a stopgap for what they hope is 3 years, 2 years, whatever? Like, on the flip side, like, do I think Morel is as bad as he was last year? Like, am I surprised what Morel did last year, not just with the Cubs and the Rays happened? Yes. Do I think it's because of what the Cubs did with him? I don't know. But all I know is that for, 2.5 years, he was not a 200 hitter. And he did adjust, like we just said, he did adjust his plate approach. Does he need to go back to doing more of what he did before? I don't know. But all I know is the Rays have shown that they can fix guys. And I know he didn't do much in the last 2 months either. But I am fearful of what he pans out to be for the Rays. And I am fearful of what happens with Biggie too. So I'm not hoping that happens for the sake of coming back to this audio to say that I was right about it. But I am
Mark it
fearful.
down, October 7th. 2024 will come back as in 5 years.
I just think it's a
does
big
Megan
move.
know that I predicted Cody Bellinger would sign on the 24th
No, you didn't
hour?
predict
the
that
24th?
one. You didn't predict that. You didn't predict that one. He predicted 83 wins last
I
year.
mean, this is the
We're
first
giving-
time I'm hearing of it.
Yeah.
So if it was really true that you predicted of it,
Oh,
and
I
it coming
predicted
through,
it.
Well, here,
I feel like I would have heard
83
it before
wins, 2 years in a row. I
Here's-
predicted.
that's not true. His content.
I think Ryan's
we'll give the
forgetting who bought
context.
his lunch last
We'll
week.
give the
Cody. I
context.
think
He
Ryan's
said-
forgetting.
He said February 24th in the 24th hour, but that was also his third prediction after the first
Oh.
two came and went.
Yeah, I don't know if
Without-
that counts.
I think
Then.
Ryan's forgetting that nice lunch he had over at Crossroads last week.
I was gonna pay for it myself.
I was gonna say one thing about Counsell, just because you mentioned about adding 8 wins and all that. I do think he did a really good job, and I am a firm believer that players deserve more criticism for not performing than maybe some people believe. But I think he did a really good job of putting guys in position to succeed. I know people didn't love how many at-bats Patrick Wisdom got, but he really utilized him well, got the best out of a guy who was maybe pinch hitting at certain points once every week.
Yeah.
And so I think there was a lot of stuff behind the scenes going on that I think will be paying off this next year. Like early in the season, he's still learning his pitchers. He's still learning his players. And so I know, and I've seen the complaints too, that he doesn't show enough fire defending his guys, but he's not really ever been that guy.
No.
I mean, I even went up and looked, like the number of times he was ejected, in Milwaukee, like he averaged like 2 a season, and I think he had 3 here in Chicago. Like, I mean, that's just who his personality is. But I do think the short-term payoff this season may not have been super obvious from the outside, but I do think it is playing a big role behind the scenes.
I think for me with Counsell, one of the big things was just letting Crow-Armstrong play every day, right? Like dealing with the guy who wasn't hitting 200, had like a 40-something, 50-something WRC plus for 2 months, and just saying, like, we're going to stick with this guy. Because I think part of it was the fact that he is playing like gold glove caliber defense and was stealing, was successful on every steal he had for like 3-4 months. Like, that obviously played a part in it, but as bad as PCA looked with the bat, Craig Counsell continuing to just stick with him and letting him hit, letting him go through the struggles. I think that also was especially in a season when you're trying to win. Like this is 2022. PCA is playing every single day, no matter what. When you're going through that May and June swoon, and one of your guys is just, 2 or 3 of your guys at the bottom of the order were kind of black holes there for a while, and Crow-Armstrong is one of those guys. You could have decided to, send him back down, move Bellinger back to center field, like try to do something to win games. But I think it's a credit to Counsell to continue to stick with the guy, play him every day, start him in center field every day. And it took a while, but we did see over the last 2 months. I know the last like week or so wasn't as good, but there was a good 5-6 week stretch there where Crow-Armstrong looked like he figured it out. And I think, I talked to him at the end of the season as well, and he gives a lot of credit for what he was able to do to just like the benefits from playing every single day, going through the struggles, being able to go through the struggles and come out on the other side and learn from them. And that doesn't happen if Counsell decides we can't have a guy hitting 198 or whatever it was in our lineup right now.
And the fact that he dropped Dansby down to 7th, I promise you, not all managers, for as much as Dansby was struggling offensively, would put a guy who has the 7-year, $177 million contract, dropping him that low in the lineup. And I think that says something, too, about Counsell.
So great.
So I think we agree that hiring Counsell is a feather in Jed Hoyer's cap for 2024, even though the results may or may not have been there, and Counsell himself is his own report card. Let's do this. I want to tell you about our Die Hard program real quick, and then we're each going to give our quick grade. I know that the best way to approach this offseason, if you're a Cubs fan, is to be a CHGO Die Hard. Why? Because it covers you for all the teams that you love. For instance, if you went to the Bears tailgate yesterday, it was 20% off your entrance. And that covers all you can drink while you're there and all the Sweetwater barbecue that you can take down while you're there. And, of course, the vibes come included, which is, priceless in itself. Then the merch that you've seen out there is also 20% off all the time.
Right here.
Merch. By the way, I have noticed that all of us are in fall gear today. Megan's got the flannel going. The other 3 of us, we're all wearing our hoodies.
Although I do have shorts on today.
And I'm not wearing any merch today. But
Me neither. It's okay.
Company guy.
But, I will tomorrow. And even James Colstock says CHGO merch equals A. There's some great shirts out there right now.
Gary gives the Die Hard program an A.
Yeah, the shoulder shirt, the Die Hard. It gets you in the
pluses.
Discord where you can yell about the Cubs all offseason if that's what you want to do. Or you can say, you know what, Jed Hoyer deserves an A+++ in the Discord after this show if that's what you want to do. You're going to get attacked by some people in Discord, but we don't.
A lot of thumbs down.
We don't let that happen. There's no real serious arguing in there. And then, of course, you want access to Ryan's articles and the newsletter that comes once a week to your mailbox. It's all part of being a diehard. And Megan may not know this, but it also comes with a diehard card, which is sort of the gold card of gold cards. It's not worth money because you can't put a price on it. It's so valuable. It's priceless, as they say. I mean, it's respect in card form. You walk in somewhere, you put the Die Hard card on the table, and instantly people know that's a player right there. Yep. It's a player in the game. I don't know what game, but it's a player in the game. They've got the CHGO Die Hard card. Question is, should Jed Hoyer be allowed to hold one of those Die Hard cards?
That's a good question.
Which brings us to our final grades for 2024 for Jed Hoyer. I'm going to go first because I don't want to be influenced by anybody else's decisions, and we'll save Cody's for last. We'll go right down the order.
Sure.
I'm going to give Jed Hoyer a straight D. Now, some people may say that's harsh. I can't believe you're being that harsh. You're usually Mr. Vanilla. But I agree that at least 70 to 80%, if not more, of the grade at this point for where the Cubs are today in is it 4-year rebuild? It was, I'm sorry.
4th year.
Wrong word. Never a rebuild. That's what I was told. A retooling. A 4-year retooling, 83 wins 2 years in a row in a division that is so mid, I can't even believe it. If you can't get in and be one of the 6 teams in the National League, 6 teams get in this division, that part of the grade is an F. So I can't get all the way to like a B, no matter how good I think some of the long-term moves were for the Cubs. I can't go from an F if it's 70 to 80% of my grade and all of a sudden say, well, it's an A++++, because some of the short-term deals and decisions and moves also are a little sus, as Cody likes to say.
I thought that was your
word.
word.
What the kids say.
That's what
I don't say.
Well, it's what the cool kids say, so I say it every once in a while. They were a little sus as well. So I'm going to go straight D.
Straight D, okay.
And I almost lingered towards D- because I still say, while the long-term moves were okay, and some of them were really good, the decision that they didn't make long-term is still the biggest problem, and that is finding the superstar. And so that one, while it is partly on ownership and maybe the majority on ownership, it also partly has to go to the president, who has to find a way to find that superstar player, even if they're not going to give him to make him top 5 in payroll. Yeah. So I'll say D. It was a rough year for him.
I guess I'll be a little bit nicer. But no, like considering
in general, you're nicer than I am. So that
that's true. My grade maybe changes if we're looking at his whole time as president of baseball operations, what he kind of was left with, farm system wise specifically, and where he got the team in 2024. Maybe different. I think if we're just grading on 2024, I'm going with a D+. I can't say that I give a whole lot of weight to making the playoffs or not making the playoffs, and not give him, like, it definitely can't be over a C for me. I think a lot of the short-term moves, I mean, people have pointed it out, like they went over the luxury tax today. They went over the luxury tax this year. A lot of that money was dead money on, Trey Mancini, Tucker Barnhart. Like, they were, even though those moves weren't made this season, they still affected this season and
affect this report card.
Yeah, I think that affects the report card. And so, yeah, I think a lot of it comes from my weight, or I give a lot of weight to it. They set out with a goal to make the playoffs this season. They had real expectations to make the playoffs this season. They failed it, and they failed it by a good chunk of it. Tom Ricketts can't say in spring training, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't be favored for the division, and then you lose the division by 10 games. Like, that's a big failure. And so for me this season, grading Jed Hoyer with all the stuff we've talked about, obviously, there was definitely good things in there for sure. But I think as a whole, I give a lot of weight to them not making the playoffs, and that's drops me down to a D+.
Wow. I feel like I'm about to get roasted for my grade here. I'm going C because, like I said, players have to perform.
Yeah.
And while, yes, obviously he's in charge of building the roster, and clearly this roster was built to be a high floor, low ceiling when you're not having kind of that superstar hitter in your lineup. Like, I mean, I don't like the 2 months again of the lineup not being able to do anything. It unfortunately for them coincided with a very important stretch of games against in division opponents.
Mm-hmm.
But I also can't ignore how they're set up for the future, and talking about the long-term things. Like, you find Michael Busch, Shota Imanaga. I mean, if they had made the postseason, I would argue outside of the Phillies, I don't know how many other teams in the postseason have a better top 3 rotation to roll out in a 5-game series. So there is a lot to like, and I do think you obviously have to weigh them not making the playoffs in there. So obviously you cannot be better than a C if you're not making the postseason for a team that's expected to. I just think too many players, which obviously, again, he built and he gave the contract extensions to Ian Happ and Nico Horner. But, players have to step up. They're getting paid a lot too, and you can't fire players really. So I'm going at a C. I don't think it was a terrible season for him. and I do think they're well positioned for next year. But obviously, yeah, I mean, going into the final year of his 5-year deal, it'll be really fascinating to see how that might influence aggressiveness in the offseason.
All right, here we go.
It's
Drum roll.
There's going to be a shift.
Oh, you make a lot of good points. I'll give you a lot of credit. You are somewhat influencing my decision in some ways. And what I mean by it's not necessarily my decision, but what I'm about to say. I think that a lot of what you said, it's what I sit at home or I sit here in our office and I'm thinking to myself a lot like, I'm absolutely infuriated with this front office. I'm infuriated with the organization as a whole. But like you said, they're still in a decent spot.
Yeah,
like they're not the worst team in baseball. They're not the White Sox. Sorry, Steven. They are they easily could be a playoff team next year.
Yeah.
Even if they ran a lot of what they have, even if they ran a lot of that back, and some of those guys that they try to project will outperform, whether you like how that strategy goes or not, that's not the point of what I'm saying. But a couple over projections from guys, or I guess breakouts from guys. Maybe PCA is a 5 or 6 WAR player, like I hope he is one day, right? That's just one example. But that's like, you can't say that Jed has put this organization in a spot to where you're a bottom 5 team in baseball, right? That said, when you are picked by not just people here in the city, but even national outlets to win the division, not just make the playoffs, win the division, and even in some aspects make some noise, even though you were only projected anywhere from like 83 to 85 wins, and then you don't make the playoffs, and you're not even really close to making the playoffs at the end, and the team that you stole the manager from that lost Corbin Burns, Brandon Woodruff had Tommy John,
Hader.
Josh Hader, I mean, he was with the Padres, but
you were calling him a hater.
You still trade him away. Like, they lost all these dudes, and not only do they win the division, they win the division by 10 games. Like, all of these things play out. Like, I can't give this guy a passing grade, man. And it's largely just because it's just been too long since this organization made the playoffs. If we were in a situation where they had been making the playoffs in recent years or whatever, maybe I'd be a little bit nicer. But, like, to me, the moment they hired Counsell, literally a few days after the World Series last year, the fact that you did that and almost signaled to fans, not even almost, you really did signal to fans, because I fell into the trap. You signaled to fans that you were going to take that next step because you outperformed your projection in 2023, and you honestly should have made the playoffs in 2023. You entered September with projected to win 90 games, and then you end up winning 83 for a large amount of reasons. The team collapsed, and there's plenty of reasons behind that. The fact that that happened, and then you make such a impressive and like shocking move that is supposed to put your team in the positive direction going forward, and then do nothing for 2 months outside of signing some minor league dudes, and then you really don't do anything until the week of Cubs convention, trading for Bush and signing Shota Imanaga, and then waiting till mid-February, which, whatever, Boris, his clients, whatever, I don't care. The fact that your big free agent signing wasn't until mid-February when me and Ryan are in Arizona for spring training, it's a lack of creativity, I guess, on trying to take this roster over the top. I don't know what it is. All I know is that, yes, things could absolutely be worse, but at the same time, when you win the World Series in 2016 and then you have some good years and the organization eventually changes direction after Theo leaves, and you start to build it back up, and you still are just not getting there, and we're here after 4 years of this, I just put my hands up and I'm like, I don't know how you're going to fix this, but man, good luck. Salute to you.
All right,
so your grade
is an F.
It's an F.
It's a big fat F from me.
All right, so we went D, F, C,
D plus.
D plus.
So it's probably like a D plus or D plus.
I do think to sum it up that
GPA.
Does everybody agree here that
if
they happen to win 83 games and don't make the playoffs next year, his job will almost certainly be on the line? I don't want to see anybody get fired. I'd like to see him go get a big move this offseason, and the Cubs are back in the playoffs next year, and you don't care what your grade was this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's on the line, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
for sure.
If he's not, like, he didn't do that to me. I mean, clearly he didn't do it to the front office, but definitely not to me. He didn't show me this year that he deserves a contract extension, Jed. And this is why he's going into, at least as far as we know right now, going into 2025 on the last year of his contract without any certainty on what his future is after that. I think that's a big sign that ownership's not happy with what happened this season, and they don't know for sure that he's the guy to lead this team back to the playoffs. I don't think any of us would say that he's for sure the guy that's going to lead this team back into the playoffs. So, while Meghan, as you said, that Jed has, I think, this organization as a whole in a good spot moving forward. The people like that will say there's no hope for this team moving forward. Like, I think they're wrong. I think there is hope, as Cody said, even next year, depending on what they do this offseason. Like, there is hope for this team to even make the playoffs next season. But the whole point is grading it on this season. And to me, it was just they failed to meet a lot of their goals. They may be in a great place moving forward, but this season was a failure from that perspective of, did you meet your goals? No.
And I totally understand if every Cubs fan wanted to grade him an F. I think part of it, too, is just like thinking of the variance from year to year when it comes to making the playoffs. I mean, how much would people's feelings be if their season ultimately played out like last year, where they're going into the final weekend of the season with a chance to still make the postseason and fall short on the penultimate game of the regular season and still end up with 83 wins. So and I get it. Like, you can't take that and implement it into this year. I just think, again, like, there are a lot of good players on this team. Like, and you know what? And honestly, they are probably fortunate that they finished with 83 wins because their pitching staff, their rotation in particular, largely stayed very healthy. Even with guys ending up on, the IL occasionally. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't blame any Cubs fans who are fired up and very dissatisfied where the organization is at. Obviously not making the playoffs, as you alluded to what Tom Ricketts said in spring. Like, this was a team that was expected to be right up there in the division. And so, yeah, I mean, obviously they have a lot of work to do in the offseason to build that trust back as well.
Yeah.
I just think that a lot of people that were patient and have given Jed the chance to build this thing back up. I think a lot of those people, including me, have ran out of patience. And that's that, and that's why I'm giving him an F, because I'm tired of waiting.
The franchise might too if you get another year of it, but he's getting another shot at it. And as Brian said, this is a big offseason for the Chicago Cubs. Will the moves reflect that? That's what we're going to find out. Meghan, thanks so much for coming in. It was fun.
Yeah.
That's the first one we're grading. I'm not sure who we're going to grade yet tomorrow. Who do you want to grade tomorrow? Let's go to the outfield. Let's go to the outfield. We'll mix up. We'll do a position player and a pitcher each day.
That's what we'll do tomorrow.
We'll do Hap and a pitcher. That's going to be our show at 11:30 tomorrow. Thanks to Meghan Montemurro from the Tribune. And thanks to you for joining us in the live YouTube chat. Appreciate you. Until Tuesday's show at 11:30. Thanks for watching and fly the W.
We all silly like the mayor.